Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Book Trek 2023. This is a summer-long event where we're reading Star Trek all summer long during these hot, languid months that I associate with Star Trek. I associate Star Trek with summer. I'm not quite sure why. I spent a whole summer watching Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, every single time it showed at the local movie theater. I never missed a showing of it. I watched every single showing, every single day that it was in town for all summer long. That might have something to do with it, but also the Star Trek show, the Star Trek books, perfect for lazy summer reading. So I'm embracing Book Trek 2023. There is no structure to this event. If you read a little Star Trek of any kind, you have participated. But today is Tuesday, and that is Tag Tuesday on BookTube. I don't get tagged because I'm an outcast, a leper, a pariah. But that doesn't mean I can't make a tag and tag other people. And I did. I made a tag, another tag. I've already made a Star Trek tag. I made the Next Generation tag. And prompt number one is The Next Generation premiered in 1987 and for 7 years regularly racked up higher ratings than any other Star Trek franchise. What has been your relationship with the show? And in this case, my relationship with the show has been radically altered by Book Trek itself. When this was announced and Starlog magazine was having every single bit of gossip or tidbit or prediction imaginable, I was gobbling all that up. Thinking, Roddenberry, okay, he's making a new Star Trek show and it's set almost a century after Kirk and Spock. What is that? What'll be going on there? Kirk and McCoy won't still be alive. I was still thinking of Star Trek only in terms of them. And I eagerly awaited it when it premiered, and was not overly impressed. I didn't really think much of it at all, and started to notice negative reactions. The most famous negative reaction at the time was William Shatner, who said that he kind of liked the show, he just wished they wouldn't call it Star Trek. I read that quote and I thought, okay, but who are you saying is they? This is Gene Roddenberry, who made you a mega star. He's the one that you're saying you wish hadn't called this Star Trek. Surely if anybody gets to call it Star Trek, he is. He gets to do that. But I didn't like it. It seemed to me to be stiff and hokey and preachy and starchy and very talky. And there was a bit of momentum involved in that. I just kept that opinion. I watched dutifully. And every once in a while, I watched an episode that even I had to admit was really well done. Brothers, for instance, where we meet Worf's family and his human family, and we meet Picard's brother, played by Jeremy Kent. And a couple of other episodes that are just, to me, seemed undeniably really good. At the time, I would say that I would call them real Star Trek. And the whole time that I was knowing that, and then embracing Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise, the whole time that I was embracing all those later shows and knowing that there were occasional good moments in Star Trek The Next Generation, but persistently calling it Star Trek The Boring Generation, I also knew that a whole generation of Star Trek fans were fans of that show. They knew about the original series, but they loved The Next Generation. And not only that, it wasn't just that they loved it. I mean, those of us who loved the original series definitely loved it. It was more than that with The Next Generation. I heard it over and over again from people, unprompted, most of whom didn't know my withering opinion of the show. I heard it over and over again that not only did I love The Next Generation, but it really helped to make me. It helped to form me as a person. I never heard that. The only people that said that about the original series were nuts. They were oddballs. And no one said that about Deep Space Nine or Voyager, much less poor Enterprise. But about Star Trek The Next Generation, it was fairly common for me to hear that from many sources who did not know each other. And I guess on some level that was giving me pause and making me think, it's an uncomfortable thing to eat crow. You like, when you develop a withering comedy routine about something, you like to keep that comedy routine. Withering comedy routines don't grow on trees. You like to keep them rather than abandon them. But I never did abandon it. I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong here and there just a little, but these people, I don't know what's wrong with them. And then Book Trek came along. Book Trek is almost entirely the crew that Vin at Revenant Reads assembled. Almost entirely, I would say, they are creatures of The Next Generation, not the original series. And I knew that. And I knew that there were plenty of other people out there like that, so I finally bit the bullet and just ate crow and revisited The Next Generation. I was aided just a little by Star Trek Picard. Kurtzman Trek scored the coup of having Patrick Stewart reprise his role as a 100-year-old Jean-Luc Picard. And I found that the first season of that and the second season interesting enough to aid me in that plus Book Trek, in looking again at The Next Generation. And boy, am I glad I did. I found a whole new franchise to Star Trek that I had not had before, that I had been dismissing before. I found that it wasn't trying to be the original series. It was trying other things. It had a large element of wanting to shape its viewers, which the original Star Trek did not at all. Of course, at all. This show wanted to tell its viewers about the glories of science, about the glories of investigation, about the importance of intellect, of measured discussion, of collegiate respect, all kinds of things that I had considered boring because I had been measuring it against the wrong thing. I rediscovered the show because of Book Trek and like it. I came to like it a great deal, a great deal. I came to see all sorts of things in it. After the third season of the show, I came to see all sorts of things in it that I had just missed before, including unbelievably good chemistry between the great bridge crew. A chemistry that I had poo-pooed, but that really is terrific. It is a better chemistry than the chemistry in the original series because it was built to be that way. The chemistry between the legendary bridge crew in the original series was accidental. It was great, but it wasn't made to be that way. Whereas Star Trek The Next Generation, among all the other things that it's doing, is the slow, steady building of a family. With the final member being added in the final episode. I didn't see any of that originally. It took revisiting it in the light of Book Trek for me to see that. And that created a huge new appreciation that was right as its ripest when Picard Season 3 came out, and I watched Picard Season 3, which is incredible, and the greatest love letter to a Star Trek series imaginable. Just plain and simple. I would have thought once upon a time that the greatest love letter to a Star Trek series imaginable was either Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, the movie, or the Deep Space Nine episode, More Tribbles, More Troubles. I would have thought it was either one of those two. But no. The whole of Star Trek Picard Season 3 is an amazing tribute to the Next Generation, and that pretty much put the capstone on it. So that is my long relationship with the series. It started out as scornfully as it could get, and has now come all the way around, ripened into pure appreciation. I love the thing. Prompt number 2. The Enterprise D is the name of this prompt. Picard's Enterprise continues the epic adventures of Jim Kirk's Enterprise. Did you read Next Generation books as they were coming out? Have you read many of them since? I did. I read the first year of Star Trek The Next Generation novels, and they were terrible. I think even Star Trek The Next Generation fans would admit that. They were terrible. There wasn't much to go on. There was no real sure footing for what fans would make of the show. There was no sure knowledge that there would be a legendarium, like there is with the original series. And there wasn't much known. There wasn't much known about the crew. In that first season of Star Trek, are Captain Picard and Beverly Crusher going to be love interests? That's among many other things. That sort of thing. None of those things were resolved. These were wooden cardboard cutouts for a long time until the Borg show up. They were wooden cardboard cutouts, and the books reflect that. So yeah, I started reading them and I hated them. I hated them even. In fact, the poor quality of the books reinforced my opinions of the show. Everything just sort of fed into me dismissing this thing. And then I stopped. I let them go for a long time and only barely dipped in now and again. If a writer I liked did something, I might read something like that, but otherwise no. I've been making great progress in the last 3 years reading Star Trek The Next Generation books or rereading them for Book Trek. That's my latest exposure to these books, is that I am slowly but surely absorbing them all now that I like the show. Then prompt number 3. the crew. And by this, I mean the great bridge crew. So Captain Picard, Will Riker, Dr. Crusher, Geordi LaForge, Data, Worf, and, oh my God, who am I leaving out? I'm leaving out somebody. Who am I leaving out? Did I? It's 7 people, right? It's Picard, Riker, Crusher, Data, LaForge. Oh, Deanna Troi. Of course, I'm leaving out Deanna Troi and Worf. So of those 7 people, those are the 7 people I'm talking about for the crew. The stellar bridge crew, the Enterprise D, is far less human than that of the classic Enterprise. Not meaning any insults here, but it's true. Jim Kirk's Enterprise had Mr. Spock, who was half human and half Vulcan, and otherwise was all humans. Do you deviate from the textbook human norm? In what ways are you some sort of circus sideshow freak? You belong on a toadstool, right next to the dog-faced boy. That's what I want to know about you. It's true about our crew, right? I'm not maligning them. Captain Picard has an artificial heart, and God knows what was left behind him from being completely carved apart and remade by the Borg. I mean, Annika Henson is given her Borg implants, and even with the best medicine that the holographic doctor on Voyager can do, he can't remove them all. So it stands to reason that Picard still has Borg stuff inside him. And that's to say nothing of Picard in Star Trek Picard, who isn't even human now. He's an android himself. But Picard certainly doesn't count. He certainly has deviations from the textbook human. Deanna Troi is only half human. She's half alien. Data, of course, is not organic at all. He's an android. Worf is not human at all. He's not half Klingon like B'Elanna Torres. He's full Klingon. Geordi LaForge is partially cybernetic. He has a cybernetic enhancement to his vision. It's right down the line there. I would say that Riker and Crusher are the only 2 completely human members of the Enterprise D's bridge crew. So I want to know about you. I want to know how completely human you are. For instance, when it comes to Geordi LaForge, or for instance, Picard, or even Data, do you have an artificial part inside you? Do you have a knee replacement, hip replacement, a heart valve replacement, something like that? A pin in a joint, something like that? I myself do not. I do not have anything like that. I do not have any surgical enhancements to my body. I do deviate from the human norm in quite a few ways. I have almost no sense of touch, for instance. I have extremely good sense of smell. I'm really, really good at resolving images in low light or no light. I can wander around. I can walk around confidently in a room that you would consider dark. And there are 1 or 2 other things. There are minor little things here and there. But what about you? Are you completely human? The classic book track question. And then we'll move on to prop number 4, which is Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Captain Jean-Luc Picard is a starship captain, but could easily have followed a different path and been a professor or an archaeology professor or an archaeologist of some kind. We very much get the impression, we're told over and over again in Star Trek The Next Generation books, that he's only a captain because that was the next step on the chain of command. It was never a dream of his. Which is another reason why I disparaged the show originally, because I thought, well, great, so he's a bureaucrat. He's an a-hole boss. We've all had a-hole bosses, and he's one of them. And Patrick Stewart's performance in the show really doesn't dispel that. You really don't get the impression that it would have been all that pleasant to work on Picard's Enterprise. First of all, you would never see or speak to the captain, unlike on Jim Kirk's Enterprise, where you get the impression that he knows everybody. Some better than others. Well, Picard's Enterprise, of course, is much bigger. It's 3 times the crew complement. So you get the impression on Picard's Enterprise that the most you would do is occasionally have a meeting with your department head. But maybe once a year, you might get a conference with Mr. Data, but you would never talk to the captain. And Patrick Stewart's performance in The Next Generation often gives the impression that if you had talked to the captain, it would have been all that pleasant. Is it possible that Jean-Luc Picard would have been happier as an archaeologist? We don't know. We have no idea. But the question is, do you have any idea what your dream job would be? First of all, I definitely want to hear from any of you who are lucky enough to have what you consider to be your dream job. And what do you make of that? What are you talking about when you talk about a dream job? When I mention a dream job, what I'm thinking about is something that, to put it in the stereotypical way, you would do even if you weren't paid. And I have been lucky enough to have a couple of those jobs in my life. I worked in a bookstore, a retail bookstore, for a long time. But I've also, long before that, I was a book review editor. I was a book section editor. I was a book reviewer, book critic, columnist. Just a writer and an editor entirely caught up in the world of books. And then I stopped that for a long time to be a bookstore worker. And now I am all those things again. I am a columnist. I am a book section editor. I am a book critic. And I really, I'm not swimming in money, but I really can't picture being happier doing anything else. Part of that, as is true in any discussion of a dream job, part of that is ignorance. I'm perfectly willing to admit that. I don't know, for instance, what it's like to make my living as an author. Maybe I would consider that a dream job. Maybe I would look back on this as, boy, you weren't fulfilling your potential. You had no idea how happy you could be. I've never done it. So have you? In case you've noticed, this Next Generation tag is just the kind of nosy questions that Steve loves to ask. What about you and your dream job? Do you have it? Do you know what it would be? And, I'm not talking here about the high school answer of, yeah, my dream job would be sitting by a pool getting paid $1 million to do nothing. I don't think that's anybody's, no adult's actual dream job. You know what I mean when I say a dream job. Do you have it? Do you know what it would be? Do you ever think, if you don't have it, do you ever think about working towards it? Tell Steve all. But anyway, we're going to move on here to Will Riker. In his off hours, Will Riker is unapologetically hedonistic. He doesn't just play jazz. He also frequents the spas of Risa. He knows how to have a good time. Very refreshingly done. The more I look at Jonathan Frakes' performance throughout the whole of The Next Generation, from that first episode of The Next Generation all the way to Star Trek Picard Season 3, the more impressed I am by the job he does. Let's see here. How much of a pleasure seeker are you? Have you ever done anything in Vegas that very much needed to stay in Vegas? Do you have a hedonistic side? And by that, I don't mean do you occasionally enjoy yourself. I mean, hedonism is enjoyment for enjoyment's sake. It's pleasure for pleasure's sake. It's letting go of any sense of the ingrained puritanism of the American character, for instance, and just giving yourself over to the pleasure pits of Risa for whatever. Do you ever do that? Do you ever let your hair down completely? Or does it have any attractions for you to do that? How hedonistic are you? What side of you is that, if at all? And for me, I have to say, in that respect, I don't know if it's the ingrained Boston Puritanism, but there is no such thing for me. I cannot do such a thing without thinking that I am wasting reading time, which might mean just that I have the reading bug so bad that I'm never going to get rid of it. I cannot imagine lounging by a pool, for instance. I have a whole bunch of friends that have Instagram accounts that have millions of followers, and they post pictures regularly. They vacation permanently. That's what they do. They get sponsors to just bring them from hotel to hotel. And invariably, they show the pinnacle of their vacation experience as lounging by a pool, literally doing nothing. I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine enjoying it at all. That's reading time or writing time or both. Now, and when it comes to pleasure, give me a friend over here over wine and calzones with dogs that aren't in any kind of distress. I'm as happy as a clam. I don't need the pleasure pits of Risa, but I want to know about you, if you do. Then prompt number 6 is Deanna Troi. Deanna Troi is not a full telepath. She's half betazoid. Her mother's people are full telepaths, betazoids. She's half, and for some reason, that waters down her ability but doesn't remove it. So she is an empath. She can sense strong intents, strong emotional states. It's not as intrusive as the telepathy of her mother, for instance. But it's at times it's very vague. So at times it's no more than just a simple observant human would be. But the question is, how empathetic are you? And I guess I should be asking this of your best friends, Not you, but I don't have them here. So I'll ask you, how empathetic do you consider yourself? When you're in a situation, how likely are you to think about what that situation is making other people feel? And if I'm going to be brutally honest with myself, I would say that my empathy is probably only average when you think of humans. My empathy is through the roof. It is unmeasurably high when it comes to dogs. And pretty much as high when it comes to lots of other animals. I am the person who will rescue a mouse. I'm the person who will try to rescue a rat or a bird or whatever. I'm the person who will think about every single individual pig penned up in the truck on the highway going to the slaughterhouse having never seen the sun. I'm the person who will think about that, and it will make me feel bad. I can't turn that off. And when it comes to dogs, well, I take in dogs. I give them a home for 16 years. I do anything for them. Humans, I like to think that I am empathetic in a way. If a human reaches out to me, or if I'm aware that someone's in a bad strait, I'll do my best to help. And I want to know about you. How empathetic are you? So I imagine that some of you are a whole lot more empathetic than I am. Then prompt number 7 is Dr. Crusher. Dr. Crusher is the first Enterprise officer to serve with her own child. Little Wesley, instantly hated by fans. Now beloved by fans. Will Wheaton is now beloved by fans. Wesley Crusher is not, but Will Wheaton is. But little Wesley Crusher was instantly hated by fans, and hated also by Jean-Luc Picard, God bless him. Have you ever worked with one of your children? Or could you, considering what pathetic losers they are? Have you ever worked in a workplace with a kid? Maybe you run the office? There's a temp job or something that you get your kid in there? And if so, feel free to tell me what it was like. Of course, I have never worked with a child of my own, because Deb and I always got rid of our children. They held our interest for a while, but they're so boring. Babies are so boring. That somebody would come along and have, old issues of Conan the Barbarian. Do you want to trade your kid for the old issues of Conan the Barbarian or back issues of Betty Crocker magazine? And we would say yes. We'd hem and haw for a while, but we'd say yes. Or they would get a little loud or a little rambunctious, and we would think, better drive them to the dump and abandon them there. And the strong ones will survive, we assume. So no, I've never worked with a kid of my own, but I bet some of you have. I'm curious to know what that's like. Question number 8 is Data. Data is a super sophisticated android, yet he voluntarily keeps a cat. Do you also have this serious personal failing? Time to confess. You're in the counselor's office. I myself do not. I have occasionally made merry with cats. I've occasionally had cats come up to me and rub themselves against me, do that weird head rubbing thing that they do. Or in one instance, when I was sitting on the floor of a used bookstore, simply curl up in my lap and go to sleep without so much as a by your leave. I've had those things happen, but I've never had a cat. No, I've always had either a house full of dogs or, as at the moment, only one dog. Frida would not react well to a cat in the house, I'm pretty sure. Unless it was a remarkable cat, she would not respond well. But tell me about you. You might as well. Some of you have many cats. And then question number 9 to end up to finish up the next generation tag. The Enterprise D's bridge crew gradually develops an excellent chemistry. Have you ever had that kind of chemistry in a work environment? So, I think you know what I mean, especially those of you who've had it. You definitely know what I mean. And I rejoice to say that I have had that feeling. I've had it in newsrooms occasionally. It's hard to come by in newsrooms. Newsrooms are so insular. It's an open office plan, but everybody's so focused on what they themselves are doing, and there are deadlines hanging over everybody, that the camaraderie usually tended to happen at bars afterwards, and that tended to be a lot more about the bars than about the camaraderie. But it still happened in limited ways in newsrooms. But I worked in a retail bookstore, and for a little while, not the whole of that time, for a little while, we hit the perfection of that sort of thing. It was, first of all, the perfect timing. I worked the information desk of a big, busy bookstore right before everybody had an information desk on their phone, on their person at all times. It was just timing. It was just the cusp of the thing. It isn't that society's gone to hell. Society has gone to hell, but not in that way. I have no resentment about it. It was just timing. We were the last flowering of the phenomenon where if you were working in the financial district in downtown Boston, and you developed in the course of the morning or that weekend a whole bunch of literary questions. Who won such and such an award? Is it well thought of? What do the critics make of it? What are the 10 books that come before it? Do you have to jump in with the first one, or can you start here? If you developed that whole bevy of questions, and you were working, at Smith Barney or whatever, and your lunch was at 1, I would see you at my information desk at 1:15, and you would be there to ask me those questions. Because it was acknowledged at the time that the people who worked the information desk of a bookstore would know their stuff. They would know more about books than you do. They would be experts, in other words. So you would go and you would ask. And you would also ask for recommendations. There's no need for that person at that desk to do that now. They can just they're online anyway. They can go to Amazon or Goodreads for agglomerate reviews. They can go to Google or Wikipedia for factual information about the author or previous prizes or anything like that. They don't. I'm not saying, boy, oh boy, the world's gone to heck. I'm saying they don't need that anymore. Myself and Deb and a whole bunch of other wonderful people, we were at that information desk from noon to 2 during our lunch rush every single weekday. Specifically so that we could handle the hordes of people coming in who needed our help. What about this book? Will I like it? What about this subject? Do you have a recommendation? That sort of thing doesn't happen much anymore. Maybe it does in your bookstore. It doesn't happen much in the retail bookstores that I know anything about nowadays. Not only do customers not come in and need that kind of help because they get their recommendations from Goodreads, but they couldn't get that kind of help even if they needed it because the people that are working at those desks don't know enough to be very helpful. And worse than that, they have been told, usually by their bosses, to push book X and books Y, regardless of what the customer wants. Once the customer gets wind that an employee has been told to lie to them, that trust is gone and is never coming back. So that whole world, that whole shining world where all of us banded together, we knew that was coming every day, that noon to 2 was coming every day. We get a whole bunch of work done in the morning. We get a whole bunch of work done in the afternoon. We could joke around with each other and horse around with each other. Tons of fun. And management as well. Most of the management that we had at the time were wonderful. They got the fact that if they exercised a very gentle hand, they would get really great results, that we were just a group of oddballs who were having lots of fun and knew what we were doing. Most of them realized that right away and just sort of had fun too. As long as you've got massive amounts of customers coming in, as long as you're making all sorts of sales, as long as you're clearing out those books, well, what's there to complain about? Of course, now there are all sorts of other measurements. The stores come up with loyalty cards and loyalty programs, and you have to sell them, whether your customer wants them or not. And it's a measure by which your boss can say you are failing if you don't do that. Back in the old days that I'm talking about, there weren't any such things like that. So management wasn't driven to make numbers or anything like that. So I did experience that. I have experienced that enjoyment. For a brief period of time, I've experienced it in later newsrooms. And also I experienced it briefly with the online literary journal where I was the managing editor, Open Letters Monthly. So I do know what it's like. I don't have it anymore. I don't have a workplace anymore. I don't imagine that I ever will again. But I have experienced it, and I want to know all about you. Have you experienced? Do you have it now? I worry that a lot of you do not, and maybe never have. I worry because there's this 21st century phenomenon of the gig economy, where people don't develop workplace camaraderie because they're not going to be in the workplace for long. They're going to come and go. Or the workplace itself is going to come and go. So I worry about that. But I wonder. I want to know. I'm nosy. So if you feel like doing the Star Trek The Next Generation tag, you will be telling me all sorts of things that I want to know and that I would pry out of you over wine and calzones if you were here in person. So that's my Book Trek entry for today. It's not a book review. It's a tag. But I'll be back tomorrow. Some other Star Trek book. So feel free to do this. Of course, I tag my co-hosts for Book Trek if they feel like doing this. But anybody else who does this, feel free to weigh in. And I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.